So at the start of 2024, I was working 60 hours a week in software sales, barely riding my bike at all. Literally just 15 months later, I was riding with UCI ProTeam Poultry Visit Mower. And the strange part is, going pro at the start of this wasn't even the plan at all. My name's Charlie Meredith, and this is how all of that happened. At this point, cycling had slowly drifted out of my life because for the previous 4 years, my focus had gone pretty much completely into my business and then into tech sales. So I was working like long hours under high pressure and my targets were resetting every month. So work was pretty relentless. Cycling had become something I did when I could, and some weeks I wouldn't ride my bike at all, which was a big change for me actually, because before business and software sales, I'd actually spent most of my life racing bikes. I started racing in 2010 when I was 12 years old, and over the next few years, I progressed my way up to the junior ranks where I won races such as Junior Tour of Ireland, and I won a Junior National Series overall. I also finished 6th in a UCI junior race in the GC, which by my standards on the flat race was pretty good. I then moved into under 23s, which did have its challenges and setbacks. I did go on to win in races such as Tour of Liège against Conti level teams, and I had podiums and top 10s at the UCI Point 2 level, where riders were stepping up to Pro Tour and World Tour level teams. At my best, I was at around 6.3 watts a kilo for 20 minutes. And what makes this story crazy is several years later, after barely training for 4 seasons, I actually ended up hitting numbers higher than that. Before any of that, 2019 was the season that actually changed everything for me. So I had 2 pretty bad crashes, both contained concussion, and the last one I landed on my head at about 65k an hour. Unfortunately, this concussion wasn't managed properly, and as a result, for 6 months, I had really poor sleep and short-term memory loss. Eventually, I had to step away from cycling altogether just to recover. And honestly, don't want to sound too deep, but that was probably one of the lowest points of my life. I'd gone from chasing the dream of being pro to having to completely quit the thing I loved. So by 2020, I'd stepped away completely. And for the next 4 years, my life shifted to my career. Cycling faded into the background. Some months I trained and some months I didn't. And to be honest, I never really thought about coming back to racing again. But even during those years, I still had the habit of pushing myself because strangely, that is something I find fun. In 2022, for example, I had a short phase where I was chasing Strava comms and yeah, just trying to sort of see how good I could get. And to be fair, I hit some pretty good power PBs. I even did a 15:03 5k off of like literally no training at all, which definitely showed the top end was still there. Even though I wasn't a full-time rider anymore, I think I still never really came to terms with it. So I still had that mentality and I'd still be going out and pushing myself as if I was still training to, I don't know, do my next race or something. And to be honest, across those 4 years, one question never really left me, and that was if I did everything correctly and things were different, like how good could I have become? Or if I carried on, like how good could I have become? In my final year, across those 4 years, it ended up being my lowest hours-wise with just 107 hours. In the end, from 2020 until 2024, I ended up doing about 737 hours, which is obviously less than what pros do in a year. And I guess this is where the comeback story really begins. So I was working in software sales in the AI space. And to be fair, it can be a really good career. So quite quickly, you can become like a 6-figure earner. And to be fair, things are going really good. But if I'm honest, I really wasn't enjoying it. And it all just felt like a bit empty. I felt like I was just constantly chasing these targets that were resetting every month. I didn't really feel like I had a purpose as to what I was doing in my life. At this moment, this is where things changed pretty quickly. So I was made redundant, my nan passed away, and my relationship ended. So yeah, quite a few things in a short space of time. My nan passing away actually hit me pretty hard and made me think how short life really is. And at that moment, I knew that I couldn't keep doing something I didn't enjoy work-wise, and obviously made the rest of my life unenjoyable, so that had to change. So I started training again because I think all along that's what I really wanted. I didn't have a big comeback plan. I had no aspiration to race again. I just wanted to ride my bike, and yeah, I gave myself 6 weeks to just sort of figure my life out and see where it went. And then something happened much faster than I expected. So within about 7 weeks of riding, I hit a 7-minute power PB, and literally 1 week later, I did a national B race and I won the opening time trial by 25 seconds. Honestly, at this point, I was pretty surprised and I was like, okay, let's see where this goes. By early June, a lot of what I had been reflecting on over those 4 years actually really started to click. I realized I developed quite a lot later than everyone else. At 15 years old, I was literally 5'3", and for context, now I'm 6'1". So I was quite late to the party in that aspect. I also realized that before I hadn't optimized things such as sleep, nutrition, and I wasn't very good at sticking to the training, to be honest. My coach was setting me. I was too interested in going for Strava KOMs. I mean, don't get me wrong, I always worked really hard, but I didn't do it all in the right way, you know? So I could always push myself, but again, if you're just going for Strava comms, it could be more optimal, couldn't it? Back then, I was also quite resistant to change, and this time coming back into it, I was much more open-minded. So yeah, once I started looking at training and performance, I'd realized actually there was quite a lot more I could improve, which obviously was super exciting. So yeah, at this point, I'd only been training for about 4 or 5 weeks, but to be honest, it made the direction of where I wanted my life to go like pretty obvious. I wanted to build something around cycling, so YouTube, coaching, and see if I could reach my full potential. So I started training properly, doing about 16 to 19 hours a week, VO2 work, under over threshold work, and yeah, just being more consistent in general. And to be fair, my numbers started moving really quickly at this point. So by early July, I'd hit a 1 minute power PB. Then I did 2 5-minute power PBs where I hit 7.7 watts a kilo and 7.8 watts a kilo back to back. Again, at this point, I wasn't doing anything too crazy here. I was just doing consistent volume, working hard, and finally doing all the basics right. But yeah, that was enough to see good improvement. A mate of mine then sent those numbers off to Jez Hunt, who is a former double national champion, rode for Team Sky, and he's currently a coach for EF. Just to name a few things, would take too long to list all his results, I think. And he said to me that I should seriously consider going pro. And to be honest, up until that point, like that hadn't even crossed my mind. Like I knew my numbers were good, but I didn't know they were that good. Once he said that, I was just like, yeah, why not? If I can do that, then let's just do it. Simple as that. And to be honest, that was really exciting because that dream that I once had for so long, that collapsed, now felt like it had totally come back. So from that point, things completely changed. So the coaching and the YouTube took a back seat, and I was fully focused on going all in for 2025. So at this point, my raw power was really good, but my fatigue resistance and durability weren't where they needed to be in order to be at pro level. So Jez had me doing longer rides, more efforts later on in the sessions, and I was doing around 23 hours a week. On top of this, I knew that if this was going to work, I had to find a team with the right environment for 2025. So after some research, Spain stood out to me straight away because it had a clear pathway to World Tour and Pro Tour level, and it also had the right terrain for me. I was already speaking with a Spanish pro team, and they suggested that I join Grupo Ulen in the Basque Country. And honestly, I thought things would take off pretty quick when I got there, get some results, get a contract, but to be honest, things didn't start out that way at all. So in March, I had COVID the entire month, and I was getting some good results. I was getting on the podium, and things looked like they were going pretty well, but internally, I was pretty worried. By the end of the month, it hadn't improved at all. I had no symptoms still, and I was thinking, if I keep going like this, like it could generally turn into something longer term. I honestly thought my whole season could be over before it even started. That was the first time in the whole comeback that actually things felt pretty uncertain, because up until that point, everything had been really smooth. So I went home and reset, and luckily I got better within 1 week. Once I was better, I trained harder than I did throughout the whole comeback for that next 5 weeks. So I did some 25-hour weeks and some 27-hour weeks, and I stacked quite a lot of VO2 sessions. I also tracked all of my food just to make sure I hit race weight. And everything was focused towards one big goal race for me, which was the Vuelta Bidasoa in May. When I went back to Spain, everything just clicked. And on the first stage of Vuelta Bidasoa, I won the uphill time trial and I took the yellow jersey. So suddenly I was leading the race, and the next stage was absolute chaos because it was just like wet, greasy roads, crashes left, right, and center, and they were just attacked constantly, but nothing went until later on when the big breakaway went, which was almost uncontrollable. My team did what they could, but unfortunately we did end up losing the jersey. That was a bit of a rough day, but luckily the next day I did bounce back, and it was quite a hilly stage. The Queen stage, in fact. I won the Queen stage and I finished second overall. So to take 2 out of 3 stages in the biggest stage race of the year, I was really pleased. Honestly, it was a huge relief because I knew at 27 years old, if I wanted to have a chance of going pro, I had to win bike races. So I'd had all that stuff early March. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself because I knew I had to get a win or 2 wins at least to be speaking with the right teams. And yeah, for it to pay off was massive. That was the moment where teams really started paying attention. At this point, I'd already been networking with teams myself since the previous year. I didn't have an agent, so I knew that if I wanted to make opportunities for myself, I had to keep talking with teams. So yeah, from there I had more interest, more calls, and by this point I was speaking with about 4 pro teams. And then, thankfully, after weeks of conversations and wondering if something was going to come, one team did make a decision, and that team was Pulte Visit Malta. I then went and joined their team training camp in Bormio just to meet the staff and to see how I fit in with the team. And shortly after that, I flew back out to Milan to do some VO2 max testing and medical testing. From August onwards, I was racing as a stagiaire for Pulte. For those that don't know, stagiaire is basically a short-term rider for the second part of the season, not on a full contract. And honestly, it was an incredible experience. Literally everything was taken care of. I'm not gonna list everything that they did, but let's just say it's like literally all I had to do was move physically around and everything else was just done in place for me, you know? So for the first time, I was fully in on the professional experience, you could call it, which was obviously something I'd only ever watched on TV before. But as a stagiaire, I couldn't score UCI points for the team, so because they were really pushing for the top 30 of the UCI rankings, which obviously secures their places in races such as Giro d'Italia, it meant that I did spend a number of races just purely working for the team. Obviously that's not their fault, they have a job to do, and it was really, really important that they did score those points and get there. But yeah, my main opportunity came at the Tour of Istanbul time trial, which I arrived at the day before at 3 in the morning, which wasn't ideal. So yeah, I ended up taking 12th, and personally I was a little bit disappointed because I felt like there was a lot more to give. After 4 stages overall, I finished 8th in the GC, which I don't think was such a bad result, but I felt like there was more to give, so you know, you always want more sort of thing. Overall, the experience showed me that, yeah, I can be competitive at that level. I know there's obviously higher level pro races, but for me, I was more pleased with the fact that on a personal level, I knew about where I was at, and yeah, I was content with that. But that experience also showed me the other side of the dream, so to speak. So constant travel, a lot of time away from home, race schedule changes, and it also showed me around contract uncertainty. If I'm being honest, the lifestyle wasn't quite what I imagined it to be. And I really realized I wanted more freedom just to live on my own terms. At the end of December, I had a few options with other teams, not with Pulte, but there was a chance to still keep racing in 2026. But when I thought about it properly, I ended up realizing something different. Ever since I was 12, all I dreamt about was becoming a pro, and that's something I even put pressure on getting in the season itself. By that point, it was weird because I could see it quite clearly. Like, I really love cycling, but I just didn't love the lifestyle that came with professional racing. And once I'd proved to myself that I could reach that level, even, you know, as a stagiaire, like, I could see that I had the level and I knew what I could do, but it felt like I didn't need to keep chasing it anymore. So now I haven't just walked away from cycling, I've just chosen a different way to pursue it. Like, honestly, I love this sport more than anything, but just not the pro lifestyle all around it. So you're probably wondering now, what next? What am I doing now? And to be honest, the goal is really simple. So I'm self-coached now, and the goal is to see how close I can get to my full potential. That means chasing numbers like 6.8 watts a kilo for 20 minutes, going after some of the biggest Strava KOMs in the world, and yeah, answering that one big question that I've always had, which is, what is my full potential? And this channel is where I'm going to document that whole process. So I'm going to share my training, nutrition, and yeah, everything I've learned as a rider for the last 16 years. And more than that, I also want to build a community where riders can learn, improve, and get faster. I'm also offering coaching to riders as well. So if any of that sounds interesting, please don't forget to subscribe, and please check out the links in the description below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.